Lyra didn't know that the hooded figure examining the tribute line was the most powerful alpha in the realm. She didn't know that his golden eyes had already found her among the dozens of offered daughters, and she certainly didn't know that when she stepped forward to offer herself as sacrifice, she was walking straight into the arms of her fated mate. The war had raged for 3 years, 3 brutal, bloody years that had drained her father's kingdom of gold, grain, and hope. The enemy's wolves were faster, stronger, more ruthless than anything their small realm could field. Every battle brought news of more losses, more territory fallen to the Alpha King's relentless advance. Standing in the great hall of her father's crumbling castle, Lyra smoothed the rough wool of her only decent dress and tried not to think about what came next. Around her, 24 other young women waited in terrified silence. Daughters of lords, merchants, even farmers, anyone willing to offer their child to end the bloodshed. "The Alpha King will choose one," her father had announced the night before, his voice hollow with defeat. "One tribute to seal the peace treaty, one life to save thousands." What he hadn't said, what everyone knew, was that the chosen girl would not return. The Alpha King's appetite for destruction was legendary. No one expected mercy from the beast who had carved his way through half the continent. Lyra's hands trembled as she clasped them before her. Somewhere in the castle's lower levels, her younger sister Mira hid with the other children, believing their father's lie that this was merely a diplomatic gathering, 15 years old and still innocent enough to trust that their world wouldn't end today. The great doors groaned open. A column of massive warriors filed into the hall, their black leather armour gleaming in the torchlight. They moved with predatory grace, wolves barely contained in human form. The tribute candidates pressed closer together, seeking comfort in shared terror. Then he entered. Even hooded, the Alpha King commanded the space like a force of nature. He was taller than his warriors, broader across the shoulders, and something about the way he moved made Lyra's breath catch in her throat. Power radiated from him in waves that made her skin prickle and her wolf stir uneasily beneath her ribs. He shouldn't affect her this way. She was no one, a second daughter with barely enough wolf blood to shift, raised to serve rather than rule. Whatever strange pull she felt toward the hooded figure had to be her imagination. The Alpha King began his inspection without ceremony. He walked the line of trembling girls, silent as death itself. Some wept, others fainted when he paused before them. He lingered longest before Lord Garrett's eldest daughter, a stunning blonde who held her head high despite the terror in her blue eyes. Lyra forced herself to breathe steadily. With her plain brown hair and forgettable features, she would be passed over quickly. The Alpha King would choose someone worthy of his attention, someone beautiful, well-born, trained for court life, someone who could give him powerful allies along with her life. When those golden eyes finally met hers, the world stopped. Heat shot through her chest like lightning, settling somewhere behind her sternum with a painful intensity that stole her breath. A golden thread seemed to snap taut between them, invisible but undeniable, pulling at something deep in her soul. Her wolf surged forward with a recognition that terrified her. Mate. The word whispered through every fibre of her being. Impossible. Devastating. True. The Alpha King went perfectly still. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, they stared at each other across the space that suddenly felt charged with electricity. His hood had fallen back, revealing sharp features carved from granite and those burning amber eyes that seemed to see straight through her defences. Then her father's voice shattered the moment. "Your Majesty, perhaps my daughter Eleanor would suit your needs." He gestured toward the blonde, desperation making his words rush together. "She's been trained in languages, music, diplomacy?" "No." The single word from the Alpha King cut through the hall like a blade. His gaze never left Lyra's face. "Your Majesty." Her father's confusion was audible. The Alpha King stepped forward, closing the distance between them with slow, deliberate movements. Every instinct Lyra had developed screamed at her to run, but her feet remained rooted to the stone floor. The golden thread between them grew stronger with each step he took, until she could barely think past the buzzing in her head. "This one," he said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the silent hall. Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd. Lyra heard her father's sharp intake of breath, saw the shock and dismay on the other girls' faces from the corner of her eye. But all her attention was locked on the male standing before her, near enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "But your Majesty," her father stammered, "surely Eleanor or Lady Catherine would be more suitable." "I said this one." The Alpha King's voice dropped to a growl that made several people step backward. "Are you questioning my choice?" "Of course not, Your Majesty. But Lyra is... she's only..." Her father's words trailed off as those golden eyes shifted to him with predatory focus. "She's what?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lyra knew what her father wanted to say, that she was worthless, a spare daughter with no political value, a poor choice for a king's tribute. The words would be true, but somehow she didn't think the Alpha King would appreciate hearing them. "She's perfect," her father finished weakly. The Alpha King's mouth curved in what might have been amusement. "Yes, she is." Then he did something that made the entire hall freeze in shock. He reached out with one large, calloused hand and gently touched Lyra's cheek. The contact sent fire racing through her veins, and she had to bite back a gasp at the intensity of it. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone with surprising tenderness. "What is your name?" His voice was softer now, meant only for her ears. Up close, she could see flecks of green and brown in those impossible amber eyes. There was intelligence there, and something that looked almost like relief. "Lyra," she whispered. "Lyra." He said her name like he was tasting it, savouring each syllable. "The treaty your father offered included tribute to seal our agreement, a life given freely to demonstrate good faith." She nodded mutely, not trusting her voice. "I refuse the tribute." The words hit her like a physical blow. Confusion flooded her system, mixing with the strange heat still coursing through her body. If he refused the tribute, did that mean the war would continue? Had she somehow failed even at dying? But the Alpha King wasn't finished. "Instead," he said, his thumb still tracing patterns on her skin that made her shiver, "I'll take her as my queen." The hall erupted. Shouts of shock and disbelief echoed off the stone walls. Someone, probably her father, made a choking sound. The other tribute candidates began talking all at once, their voices a confused babble of questions and protests. But Lyra heard none of it. She was drowning in the Alpha King's gaze, in the impossible words he'd just spoken, in the golden thread that now felt like a chain binding her to this terrifying, magnificent male who had just claimed her not for death, but for something far more overwhelming. Queen, her, the girl who had been prepared to die in obscurity, offered up like a lamb to slaughter. "I don't understand," she breathed. His other hand came up to cup her face, cradling it between his palms like she was something precious rather than expendable. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but absolutely certain. "You will." The journey to the enemy kingdom took 3 days. 3 days of riding in a carriage that cost more than her father's entire treasury, watching the landscape change from familiar rolling hills to the dark forest that marked Alpha King territory. Lyra pressed her face to the window, trying to make sense of what had happened. One moment she had been prepared to die for her people. The next, she was travelling toward a future she couldn't even imagine as the promised queen of her homeland's greatest enemy. Queen. The word felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she'd never learned. Queens were born to their roles, trained from birth in politics and diplomacy and the 1,000 small graces that made them worthy of crowns. They weren't second daughters who spent their mornings mucking out stables and their evenings mending their own clothes. The Alpha King rode alongside the carriage, his massive black horse moving with the same predatory grace as its master. Every few hours he would dismount and check on her, his golden eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Are you comfortable?" he had asked during their first stop, his voice carefully gentle. She had nodded mutely, not trusting herself to speak. How could she be comfortable? She was travelling deeper into enemy territory with every mile, bound to a male she knew only through whispered stories of his ruthlessness. But those stories seemed impossible now, watching him ensure she had warm blankets and fresh water, seeing the careful way he never came too close without her permission. This wasn't the monster from the battlefield tales. This was someone who treated her like something precious. It was that contradiction that frightened her most. On the second night, camped beneath stars she didn't recognize, he had finally explained. "You felt it too," he said quietly, settling beside the fire across from where she sat wrapped in furs. The pull, the recognition. She couldn't deny it. The golden thread between them had only grown stronger during their journey, tugging at her chest whenever he moved too far away. Even now, with the fire crackling between them, she was acutely aware of every breath he took. "I don't understand what it means." "It means we're fated mates." He stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing toward the black sky. "Two souls meant to be joined. It doesn't happen often, and when it does—" He looked at her directly, and she saw something vulnerable in those amber depths. "When it does, you don't ignore it." "Even if I'm your enemy?" A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "You were never my enemy, Lyra. Your father's choices don't define you." "But the war?" "The war is between kings and their pride, not between mates." His voice carried absolute certainty. "I won't ask you to choose between your family and our bond, but I also won't pretend this connection doesn't exist." She had stared into the flames, trying to process his words. Everything she thought she knew about the Alpha King was crumbling. The stories painted him as a conqueror who took what he wanted through force. This male was offering her a choice. "What if I can't be what you need?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "I'm nobody. I don't know how to be a queen." "You volunteered to die for your people. You think that makes you nobody?" The way he said it, with such quiet conviction, made something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Now, on the third day, his castle rose before them like something from a dream. Dark stone towers reached towards storm clouds, and banners bearing his wolf crest snapped in the wind. It was magnificent and terrifying and utterly foreign. "Welcome home," he said softly as their carriage passed through gates guarded by warriors who bowed low at his approach. Home. Another impossible word. The courtyard buzzed with activity as news of their arrival spread. Servants emerged from doorways, nobles appeared on balconies, and everyone stared at her. The future queen who had arrived in a simple wool dress with dirt under her fingernails. She felt their curiosity like a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders until she wanted to disappear entirely. These people expected royalty. They would be getting a stable girl who had never even attended a proper ball. "Breathe," the Alpha King murmured, appearing at her elbow as she stepped from the carriage. "They're staring because they're curious, not because you don't belong here." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've been waiting for you my entire life, and if you're worthy of that wait, you're worthy of anything." The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. He said it so easily, this male who could have chosen any female in a dozen kingdoms, as if her worth was self-evident rather than something she'd spent her life questioning. A severe-looking woman approached them, her grey hair pulled back in a perfect knot, and her dark dress clearly marking her as someone of importance. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a crisp bow. "Welcome home." "Mrs. Clearwater, my head housekeeper," the Alpha King said by way of introduction. She'll help you settle in." The woman's sharp eyes assessed Lyra from head to toe, and whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded once. "If you'll follow me, Your Highness, I'll show you to your chambers." "Your Highness." Lyra's steps faltered, but the Alpha King's warm hand appeared at the small of her back, steadying her. "We'll talk later," he promised quietly, "after you've had time to rest." She wanted to tell him she didn't need rest, that what she needed was for someone to explain how her life had changed so completely in the space of 3 days. But Mrs. Clearwater was already moving toward a grand staircase, and following seemed easier than standing frozen in the courtyard. Her chambers were larger than her family's entire wing back home. Rich tapestries covered the walls, thick carpets muffled her footsteps, and the 4-poster bed could have slept 6 people comfortably. A fire crackled in an ornate hearth, and fresh flowers filled crystal vases on every surface. "The seamstresses will be up shortly to measure you for proper gowns," Mrs. Clearwater said briskly. "His Majesty has requested a complete wardrobe befitting your new station. Breakfast will be served in your sitting room tomorrow at 8, and your first etiquette lesson with Lady Pemberton begins at 10. Etiquette lessons, of course, because queens didn't eat with their hands or forget to curtsy to visiting dignitaries. "Mrs. Clearwater?" Lyra's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Yes, Your Highness." "What if I'm not? What if I can't?" She struggled to find the words for her fear. "What if I'm not suitable for this?" The older woman's stern expression softened slightly. "His Majesty has never brought a female to court before, never shown interest in taking a mate. In 30 years of service I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you today." She smoothed her hands over her skirts. "That tells me everything I need to know about your suitability." After Mrs. Clearwater left, Lyra sank onto the edge of the massive bed and tried to make sense of her new reality. Through the tall windows she could see the Alpha King in the courtyard below, speaking with his advisers. Even from this distance she could feel that invisible thread connecting them, tugging gently at her chest. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The Alpha King stood in the doorway, having changed from his travel clothes into dark formal wear that somehow made him look even more imposing. "May I come in?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He entered but remained near the door, giving her space. "I know this is overwhelming. I keep thinking I'll wake up," she admitted, "that this is all some strange dream." "It's not a dream, but it doesn't have to be a nightmare either." He moved closer, just a few steps. "I meant what I said about choice, Lyra. The bond is real, but what we do about it is up to us." "And if I choose to leave?" Pain flashed across his features so quickly she almost missed it. "Then I'll have my guards escort you safely home." The simple honesty of it undid her. She had expected demands, commands, the arrogance of a king accustomed to having his will obeyed. Instead, he was offering her freedom, even though it would clearly cost him. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you deserve to be here by choice, not force. Because a crown given freely means more than one taken." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was rough with emotion. "Because I've waited this long for you. I can wait longer if that's what you need." Something in her chest cracked open at those words. Not the bond pulling at her ribs, but something deeper, something that whispered this male might actually be worth the leap of faith he was asking her to take. "I'm terrified," she said honestly. "So am I." The admission surprised her. "You're the Alpha King. What could you possibly fear?" "That you'll realize what everyone else sees, that you're too good for a king who's spent more time at war than at peace, that you'll choose the safety of your old life over the uncertainty of this one." His golden eyes met hers steadily. "That I'm not worthy of the gift fate gave me." The vulnerability in his voice broke something loose in her chest. Here was this powerful male, this king who commanded armies and conquered kingdoms, admitting his own fears as if they were equals. Maybe they were. "What do I call you?" she asked suddenly. "I can't keep thinking of you as the Alpha King." Adrian, he said, with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. My name is Adrian. Adrian. She tested the name, liked the way it felt on her tongue. Will you tell me about the loss that drove you to war? He was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. Then he moved to the window, staring out at his kingdom with haunted eyes. My younger sister, Cassandra. She was visiting a border village when rogues attacked. By the time we arrived... His hands clenched into fists. She was 17. Innocent. She died because I couldn't protect her. And the war? The rogues were backed by your father's allies. I thought if I conquered enough territory, imposed enough control, I could prevent it from happening again. He turned back to her, and she saw the weight of guilt he carried. I thought fear would keep my people safe. But it didn't bring her back. No, it didn't. Understanding flooded through her. The ruthless conqueror from the stories was just a broken brother trying to prevent more loss. Just a male carrying grief too heavy for one person to bear. Without thinking, she stood and crossed to him. When she placed her hand gently over his clenched fist, he went perfectly still. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for your loss, for the pain that drove you to this. He stared down at their joined hands, and she felt some of the tension leave his massive frame. You have nothing to apologize for. Neither do you. Grief makes us do impossible things. When he looked at her then, she saw something shift in those amber depths, something that looked like hope. Stay, he said softly. Not because of the bond or duty or politics. Stay because you want to see what we could build together. The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, and for the first time since this all began, Lyra didn't fight against it. I'll try, she whispered. It was the closest thing to a promise either of them was ready to make, but it was enough. For now, it was enough. The days that followed were a strange dance of discovery and careful distance. Adrian kept his promise about choice, never pushing, never demanding more than she was willing to give. But he was always there, a warm presence at breakfast, a steady hand to guide her through the maze of court protocols, golden eyes that found her across every crowded room. Lyra found herself settling into routines she never could have imagined. Morning lessons with Lady Pemberton, who somehow managed to teach royal etiquette without making her feel like a complete failure. Afternoons in the library with Adrian, where he patiently explained the complex politics that governed his realm. Evenings spent walking through gardens that put her father's modest grounds to shame. It was during one of those evening walks, 3 days after her arrival, that she finally found the courage to tell him the truth. I need you to know why I volunteered, she said, stopping beside a fountain carved with leaping wolves. The sound of falling water provided a gentle backdrop to her confession. It wasn't nobility or sacrifice, it was desperation. Adrian had been walking with his hands clasped behind his back, maintaining that careful distance he'd established. Now he turned to face her fully, amber eyes alert. Tell me. She took a breath, steeling herself. My father planned to offer my sister instead, Mira. She's 15 and she's everything I'm not. Beautiful, graceful, born for court life. He thought she'd appeal to you more. The words came out in a rush, years of accumulated pain spilling over. But she's also gentle, innocent. The thought of her facing what I expected to face. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, remembering that horrible night. So I convinced her to hide, told her it was a game, and I took her place. Adrian went very still. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. You thought I would hurt her. I thought you would kill her, eventually, after... She couldn't finish the sentence. After I was done with her. The flatness in his tone made her look up. His face had gone carefully blank, but she could see the storm brewing in his eyes. Adrian, Is that what you expected when you came here, when you agreed to try? Each word was precise, contained. To be used and discarded? I don't know what I expected, she said honestly, But not this, not kindness, not choice. He turned away from her, his massive frame rigid with tension. For a long moment, the only sounds were the fountain and the distant calls of night birds. "My father used to beat my mother," he said suddenly, "in private where the court couldn't see. She made excuses for the bruises, smiled at state dinners, played the perfect queen until the day she died." His hands clenched at his sides. "I swore I would never be that kind of mate, that kind of king." The raw pain in his voice made her chest ache. Without thinking, she moved closer, drawn by an instinct she didn't fully understand. "I know that now," she said softly. "I know you're not that man." "Do you?" He faced her again, and she saw the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. "Or are you just telling me what I want to hear?" The question hung between them like a challenge. He was asking her to choose, not just to stay, but to trust, to believe that the bond pulling at her chest meant safety instead of captivity. "I'm not my mother," she said firmly. "I don't make excuses or tell pretty lies. If I thought you were going to hurt me, I would fight you, or I would run." Something shifted in his expression. "And you're not running." "No, I'm not." The admission seemed to unlock something in him. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, smell the cedar and winter wind scent that was uniquely his. "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Because when you look at me, I don't feel invisible anymore," she said, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. "My whole life I've been the spare daughter, the extra mouth to feed, the one they could afford to lose." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you look at me like I matter." "You do matter." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone, with the same gentle reverence he'd shown that first day. "You matter more than you know." The golden thread between them pulled tight, and suddenly the careful distance they'd been maintaining felt impossible to maintain. She could see her own longing reflected in his amber eyes, feel the barely restrained need in the tension of his frame. Lyra. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. She rose up on her toes, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, a question rather than a demand. But when she didn't pull away, when she actually pressed closer, he deepened it with a gentle hunger that made her toes curl in her slippers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you," he confessed. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I wanted you to want it too." The simple honesty of it made her heart race. Every touch, every look, every careful gesture of the past few days took on new meaning. He hadn't been holding back out of disinterest, but out of respect for her choice. Adrian. She said his name like she was testing its weight on her tongue. "I need to ask you something." "Anything." "The other stories about you, the conquests, the ruthlessness, are they true?" He was quiet for a long moment, his arms still circling her waist. "In battle, yes. When my people are threatened, I am everything the stories say, and worse." His eyes met hers steadily. "But not with you. Never with you." "How can I be sure?" "Because you're not my enemy or my subject. You're my mate, the other half of my soul." His thumb traced her lower lip, and she shivered at the contact. "I would cut off my own hands before I hurt you." The fierce conviction in his voice sent warmth flooding through her chest. This wasn't the calculated charm of a king used to getting his way. This was raw, honest truth from a male who was just as affected by their bond as she was. A sharp cough from the garden entrance made them spring apart. Adrian immediately positioned himself protectively in front of her as a tall, severe-looking man approached. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty," the newcomer said with a bow that didn't quite hide his disapproval. "But there's news from the border that requires your immediate attention." "Marcus, my head adviser," Adrian murmured to her before addressing the man. "Can't it wait until morning?" I'm afraid not, sire. There's been an incident with the Westridge pack. Their alpha is demanding an audience. Lyra watched tension creep back into Adrian's shoulders. The peaceful moment between them was already fracturing under the weight of his responsibilities. Go, she said quietly, touching his arm. I understand. His eyes searched her face, clearly torn between duty and the desire to stay with her. We'll finish this conversation, he promised. I'll be here. He pressed a quick kiss to her forehead before following Marcus toward the castle. Lyra remained by the fountain, touching her lips and trying to process what had just happened. The kiss had been everything she hadn't known she was hoping for, gentle but passionate, controlled but deeply felt. But more than that, it had felt right in a way that went beyond physical attraction, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Enjoying the gardens? The new voice made her spin around. A woman emerged from the shadows, tall and elegant in a way that immediately made Lyra conscious of her simple dress and unpractised mannerisms. I'm sorry, I don't think we've been introduced, Lyra said carefully. Lady Catherine Blackthorne. The woman's smile was perfectly polite and completely cold. I was supposed to be at the tribute ceremony, but I was indisposed that day. Something about the way she said it made Lyra's skin prickle with unease. I see. You know, when I heard the Alpha King had chosen a mate, I was so curious to meet her. Lady Catherine moved closer, her pale blue eyes assessing. I must admit, you're not quite what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more suitable for a king. Her gaze travelled over Lyra's appearance with obvious dismissal. Someone who could actually help him rule rather than requiring constant tutoring in basic manners. Heat flashed through Lyra's chest, but she kept her voice level. I'm still learning. Of course you are, though I do wonder what the other alphas must think, seeing their king reduced to playing teacher for a common girl who doesn't even know which fork to use at dinner. The words hit their mark, stirring up all the insecurities Lyra had been trying to push down. But before she could respond, she heard Adrian's voice carrying across the garden. There you are. He appeared at her side, and she felt immediate relief at his presence. I was looking for you, Your Majesty. Lady Catherine's entire demeanour shifted, becoming deferential and sweetly charming. How wonderful to see you back at court. Adrian's response was polite but distant. Lady Catherine, I wasn't aware you'd returned from your visit to the Eastern Territories. Just this afternoon. I was hoping we might catch up sometime, perhaps discuss the Blackthorn alliance that my father and I have been. I'm sure Marcus can arrange a meeting if it's important. Adrian's tone made it clear the conversation was over. If you'll excuse us, I was about to escort my mate inside. My mate. The possessive certainty in his voice sent warmth spiralling through Lyra's chest, washing away the sting of Lady Catherine's words. Of course, Your Majesty. Lady Catherine's smile never wavered, but her eyes promised this wasn't over. It was lovely meeting you, Lyra. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other. After she glided away, Adrian turned to Lyra with concerned eyes. What did she say to you? Nothing important? Lyra tried to brush it off, but Adrian caught her chin gently, tilting her face toward the moonlight. Tell me. Just some observations about my suitability as queen. She attempted a laugh that came out more bitter than she'd intended. She's not wrong. I don't know which fork to use or how to discuss politics with visiting dignitaries. Look at me. His voice was firm but kind. Lady Catherine has been angling for a crown since she was old enough to understand what marriage meant. She sees you as competition. But she's right about nothing. The fierce certainty in his voice cut off her protest. You think knowing which fork to use makes someone worthy of ruling? I've met plenty of perfectly mannered people who would sell their own people for power. His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. You volunteered to die for strangers. You chose to save your sister at the cost of your own life. That's the heart of a true queen. The conviction in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "You really believe that?" "I know it!" He pressed his forehead to hers again, that gesture that was becoming familiar and precious. "The fork thing can be taught, character can't." Standing there in the moonlight, surrounded by the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the warmth of his certainty, Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. Not the golden thread of their bond, but something deeper. Something that felt dangerously like trust. "Adrian?" When you said we'd finish our conversation?" He pulled back to look at her, hope flickering in his amber eyes. "Yes?" "I want to try harder than just trying," she said quietly. "I want to really try, at this, at us." The smile that spread across his face was worth every moment of fear that had brought her to this point. "That's all I've ever wanted," he said, and kissed her again under the stars. The next 2 days passed in a strange rhythm of growing intimacy and mounting tension. Lyra found herself anticipating their shared meals, treasuring the moments when Adrian would brush her hand while reaching for something, savouring the way his eyes would find her across a crowded room. The bond between them hummed with contentment, but underneath it she sensed something building, a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. She was in the middle of another etiquette lesson when the storm broke. "Remember to keep your wrists straight when pouring tea," Lady Pemberton was saying, when the great hall doors crashed open with enough force to rattle the walls. A massive male strode in, flanked by a dozen warriors bearing the red wolf crest of the Northern Territories. He was nearly as large as Adrian, with dark hair and cold blue eyes that swept the room like a predator assessing prey. When his gaze found Lyra, it lingered in a way that made her skin crawl. "Where is your king?" His voice boomed through the suddenly silent hall. Adrian appeared within moments, moving with the controlled grace that meant he was ready for violence. Marcus and several guards flanked him, but Lyra could see the tension in their shoulders. "Alpha Thorn." Adrian's tone was carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" Thorn's laugh was harsh. "You think word wouldn't reach me about your unusual choice in mates?" The emphasis he put on the word unusual made Lyra's stomach clench. Around the hall, courtiers had frozen in place, sensing the danger crackling between the two alphas. "My mate is not your concern," Adrian said quietly, but his voice carried a warning that made several people step backward. "Isn't she?" Thorn moved closer, his warriors spreading out behind him. "We had an agreement, Adrian. My daughter for your crown. Political alliance through proper mating." Lyra's blood went cold. Daughter. She looked between the two males, understanding dawning like a physical blow. "We discussed possibilities," Adrian replied. "Nothing was agreed upon." "My Catherine has been preparing for this role her entire life. She understands politics, diplomacy, the delicate art of ruling." Thorn's eyes flicked to Lyra with obvious contempt. "Unlike your current pet." The word hit her like a slap. Around the hall she heard the sharp intake of breath from several courtiers. Lady Catherine appeared from behind her father's warriors, her beautiful face arranged in perfectly calculated distress. "Father, please," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of wounded dignity. "If Adrian has made his choice—" "He's made a mistake." Thorn cut her off, one that weakens both our territories. Adrian took a step forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Choose your next words very carefully." "Or what? You'll declare war on an ally because I pointed out the obvious?" Thorn gestured toward Lyra. "Look at her, Adrian. She can barely manage a proper curtsy, let alone rule a kingdom. She's common-born, enemy-blooded, and completely unsuitable for a king of your stature." Each word landed like a physical blow. Lyra felt every eye in the hall turn to her, measuring, judging, finding her wanting. The worst part was that she couldn't argue with anything Thorn had said. She was all of those things. "I challenge your right to her." The words rang out like a death knell. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs before falling into terrified silence. Adrian's eyes began to glow with an inner fire. "You dare—" "Ancient law," Thorn interrupted. "Trial by combat for disputed mating rights. Winner takes the female." "There's nothing disputed about our bond," Adrian growled, but Thorn was already shaking his head. "Bond or no bond, she was offered as tribute. That makes her spoils of war subject to challenge. Unless—" His smile was cold and calculating. "You're afraid you can't hold what you've claimed?" The taunt hit its mark. Lyra watched Adrian's hands clench into fists, saw the predatory stillness that meant his wolf was pushing close to the surface. "Adrian, no!" The words tore from her throat before she could stop them. Every head turned toward her, and she felt heat flood her cheeks, but she pressed on. "Don't do this. Not for me." "You think you have a choice in this?" Thorn laughed harshly. "Your property, girl, prize to be won. The only question is which alpha claims you." Something snapped in Adrian's chest. The sound that emerged from his throat was more growl than human voice. "She is my mate, my queen, and if you think—" "Then prove it." Thorn stripped off his leather coat, muscles rippling beneath his shirt. "Challenge accepted. Tomorrow at dawn in the old circle. Winner takes everything." "And if I refuse?" "Then you're not worthy of either a crown or a mate, and I'll take them both anyway." His eyes glittered with malice. "At least this way she'll go to the stronger alpha." Lyra felt the world tilt around her. This was her fault. Her unsuitability had brought this challenge down on Adrian's head. If she hadn't been weak, common, unworthy, none of this would be happening. "I accept," Adrian said quietly. "No!" The word exploded from her before she could stop it. "I won't be the cause of bloodshed. I'll go with him willingly if—" "Over my dead body?" Adrian's voice cut through her protest like a blade. When he turned to look at her, his amber eyes blazed with possessive fury. "You are mine, Lyra, by bond, by choice, by right, and I will kill any male who tries to take you from me." The raw conviction in his voice sent heat spiralling through her chest, despite her terror. But beneath the warmth, fear curled like ice in her stomach. Thorn was massive, powerful, clearly experienced in battle. What if Adrian lost? What if her weakness cost him everything? "Dawn it is," Thorn said with satisfaction. "May the strongest alpha win." He turned to leave, his warriors falling into step behind him. But Lady Catherine lingered, her pale eyes finding Lyra's across the crowded hall. "Don't look so stricken, dear," she said sweetly. "One way or another this will all be over soon." The threat was clear, even wrapped in silk. Lyra watched her glide away, beautiful and confident, and everything a queen should be. "Everyone out," Adrian commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Now." The hall cleared within minutes, leaving only Lyra, Adrian, and the echoing weight of what was to come. "This is my fault," she said into the silence. "No." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. "This is Thorn's ambition and Catherine's jealousy. You did nothing wrong. I'm everything he said I am, common-born, unsuitable, weak—" "Stop!" The command in his voice made her fall silent. "Listen to me. In the past week I have watched you adapt to a completely foreign world with courage and grace. I've seen you put others before yourself without hesitation. I've felt your strength through our bond every moment of every day." His thumbs traced her cheekbones, wiping away tears she didn't realize had fallen. "You are not weak, Lyra. You are the strongest person I know." "But what if he wins? What if you're hurt because of me?" "I won't lose." The absolute certainty in his voice should have been arrogant. Instead, it was simply fact. "I have something to fight for now, something worth protecting." "Adrian?" "No." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips with desperate tenderness. "I need you to believe in me. In us. Can you do that?" Looking into his amber eyes, seeing the love and determination burning there, she found her answer. "Yes," she whispered. "Good." He pulled her against his chest, holding her like she was something precious. "Because tomorrow I'm going to show everyone in this kingdom exactly what it means to threaten my mate." That night, Lyra barely slept. She paced her chambers, watching the sky slowly lighten toward dawn, terror and anticipation warring in her chest. When the sun finally crested the horizon, she dressed in her finest gown, a deep blue silk that Adrian had said brought out her eyes, and made her way to the old fighting circle. Half the kingdom seemed to have gathered to watch. The ancient stone circle was packed with spectators, their faces a mix of excitement and apprehension. At the centre of it all stood Adrian and Thorn, both stripped to the waist, muscles coiled and ready for violence. Lyra took her place in the royal box, flanked by Marcus and Lady Pemberton. Across the circle she could see Lady Catherine watching with barely concealed anticipation. "Combat begins at first horn, ends with death or submission," the herald announced. "No weapons, no interference. Let the strongest alpha claim his prize." Prize. The word made her stomach turn, but when Adrian's eyes found hers across the distance, something settled in her chest. Whatever happened, she was his choice. Not his prize, not his property, his choice. The horn sounded. Both males exploded into motion, meeting in the centre of the circle with an impact that shook the ground. Thorn was skilled, experienced, vicious in his attacks, but Adrian fought like a male possessed, every blow driven by protective fury. The battle was brutal and swift. Thorn landed several punishing hits, drawing blood from Adrian's lip and leaving claw marks across his ribs. But Adrian was faster, more focused, fighting with the desperate strength of a mate protecting what he loved most. When it ended suddenly. Thorn overextended on a strike, and Adrian seized the opening. His hand closed around Thorn's throat, lifting the larger male off his feet and slamming him to the ground with enough force to crack stone. "Yield!" Adrian growled, his voice barely human. Thorn struggled for another moment before going limp. "I yield." The crowd erupted. Adrian released Thorn and straightened slowly, his golden eyes scanning the cheering masses before finding Lyra. When their gazes met, he smiled. Bloody, triumphant, absolutely devastating. He strode toward the royal box, still breathing hard from the fight, and vaulted the stone barrier to reach her. Before she could say a word, he swept her into his arms and claimed her mouth in a kiss that tasted of victory and possession and love. When they broke apart, he kept one arm around her waist and turned to face the crowd. "Let it be known throughout the realm," he called out, his voice carrying to every corner of the circle. "This is Lyra, my mate, my queen, my everything. Any who question her worth will answer to me." The cheers that followed shook the very stones of the ancient circle. And standing there in Adrian's arms, surrounded by the acceptance of his people, Lyra finally understood what he'd been trying to tell her. She wasn't just worthy of love, she was worthy of a kingdom. The week that followed the challenge passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The coronation had been scheduled for the next full moon, and the entire kingdom buzzed with excitement. Seamstresses worked around the clock on Lyra's gown, musicians practiced songs of celebration, and the kitchens prepared for the largest feast in decades. Lyra found herself caught between terror and wonder. Every morning brought new lessons, not just in etiquette now, but in governance, law, the complex web of alliances that kept the kingdom stable. Adrian was a patient teacher, explaining treaty details over breakfast and political nuances during their evening walks. "The eastern provinces have always been independent-minded," he said one evening as they strolled through the rose garden, "but Lord Garrett has been reliable. His daughter Eleanor was actually one of the tribute candidates." "I remember her," Lyra said quietly. "She was beautiful, trained for this kind of life." Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her. "Are you having second thoughts?" No. The answer came immediately, surprising her with its certainty. No, but sometimes I wonder what she would have made of all this, whether she would have been better suited. She wasn't my mate. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs tracing familiar patterns on her cheekbones. The bond chose you, Lyra. Fate chose you. I chose you. The conviction in his voice still had the power to steal her breath. 3 weeks ago, she had been prepared to die in obscurity. Now she stood in a royal garden, claimed by an alpha king who looked at her like she hung the stars. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Adrian went perfectly still. They had danced around the sentiment for days, showing it in touches and glances and the way they fit together like puzzle pieces, but neither had spoken it aloud. "Say it again," he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you." It was easier the second time, more certain. "I love your patience, your strength, the way you see something in me that I'm still learning to see in myself." She rose up on her toes, her hands fisting in his shirt. "I love that you fought for me even when I didn't think I was worth fighting for." The kiss he gave her was fierce, desperate, full of weeks of careful restraint finally breaking free. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead pressed against hers. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you step forward in that tribute line," he confessed, "brave and selfless and completely unaware of your own worth." "Adrian, your Majesty?" They sprang apart to find Marcus approaching, with his usual diplomatic expression firmly in place. But Lyra caught the slight smile at the corners of his mouth and realised he wasn't as disapproving of their relationship as she'd initially thought. "What is it, Marcus?" Adrian's voice carried just a hint of irritation at the interruption. "Your Majesty, there's a delegation at the gates. Lord Whitmore of Ravenhill, along with Lady Lyra's family." Lyra's blood went cold. "My family?" "Your father, your sister, and several others bearing the Whitmore crest," Marcus confirmed. She felt Adrian tense beside her, his protective instincts immediately alert. Did they say what they wanted? "To attend the coronation and discuss matters of mutual benefit." Marcus's diplomatic phrasing didn't hide the distaste in his voice. "They want something," Lyra said flatly. "My father doesn't travel unless there's profit involved." Adrian's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You don't have to see them if you don't want to." "No." She straightened her shoulders, drawing on the strength she'd been building over these past weeks. "I'll see them, but not alone." An hour later, they were assembled in the formal receiving chamber. Lyra sat beside Adrian on the dual throne, a symbolic chair that had been crafted just for this purpose, wearing one of her finest gowns and the simple silver circlet that marked her as Queen-elect. When the doors opened and her family entered, the first thing she noticed was how small they looked. Her father, who had loomed so large in her childhood, seemed diminished in the grandeur of Adrian's court. Her stepmother, Martha, wore her finest dress, but it looked shabby compared to the luxury surrounding them. And then there was Mira. Lyra's heart clenched at the sight of her sister. 15 and radiant, Mira had grown more beautiful in the weeks they'd been apart. She moved with the grace their father had always said Lyra lacked, curtsied perfectly, and kept her eyes downcast in a show of proper deference. "Your Majesty," Lord Whitmore said, offering a bow that was just deep enough to be respectful without being servile. "We are honoured by your invitation to attend the coronation." "Lord Whitmore." Adrian's voice was politely neutral. "Lady Whitmore, Lady Mira. And of course, our deepest congratulations to our dear Lyra," Martha added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Who could have imagined such a fortuitous turn of events?" Fortuitous, as if Lyra's near sacrifice had been planned for this outcome. "Thank you for coming," Lyra said carefully. "I hope your journey was comfortable." "Oh, it was," her father said, with the jovial tone he used when he wanted something. "Though I must say, travelling in a royal escort was quite an experience. Your guards are very thorough." Security is important, Adrian said mildly. Of course, we wouldn't dream of questioning your methods. Lord Whitmore clasped his hands behind his back, rocking slightly on his heels. We were hoping we might have a private word with Lyra. Family matters, you understand. Anything you have to say to my mate you can say in front of me, Adrian replied, his tone pleasant but unyielding. Lyra caught the flicker of frustration that crossed her father's face before he smoothed it away. Very well, we come with a proposal that would benefit both our territories. He straightened, clearly settling into a prepared speech. With Lyra's new position, there's an opportunity to strengthen the alliance between our lands through additional marriages. Young Mira here has come of age, and there are several worthy lords in your court who might— No. The single word from Lyra cut through her father's pitch like a blade. All eyes turned to her, and she felt Adrian's silent support through their bond. I'm sorry, what did you say? Lord Whitmore's confused smile faltered. I said no. Lyra stood slowly, every inch of her posture reflecting the authority she was still learning to claim. Mira is 15 years old. She's a child, not a political pawn. She's of marriageable age. She's a child, Lyra repeated firmly, and she will remain here as my honoured guest for as long as she wishes, with no expectation of marriage until she chooses it for herself. Her father's face darkened. You forget yourself, daughter. Mira's future is not yours to decide. Actually, it is. Adrian spoke for the first time since the proposal began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute power. As Queen, Lyra has the right to offer sanctuary to any member of her family. If Lady Mira wishes to stay, she's welcome for as long as she likes. This is ridiculous, Martha interjected. We're her parents. We know what's best for— Do you? Lyra's voice was steady, but pain bled through despite her best efforts. The way you knew what was best when you planned to offer her as tribute instead of me. The silence that followed was deafening. Her father's face went through several shades of red before settling on defensive anger. That was a strategic decision. That was cowardice. Lyra took a step forward, and she felt the power of her position settle around her like armour. You were going to sacrifice an innocent girl because you thought she'd be more appealing to a king you believed was a monster. We were trying to end a war. You were trying to save yourselves with the least valuable daughter you had. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Well, it turns out the least valuable daughter became a queen, and this queen says her sister stays if she wants to stay. For the first time since they'd entered the room, Mira looked up. Her green eyes, so like Lyra's own, were wide with shock and something that might have been hope. Mira? Lyra gentled her voice, addressing her sister directly. What would you like to do? Mira's voice was barely above a whisper. I'd like to stay, if that's truly all right. It's more than all right. It's what I want. The smile that spread across Mira's face was like sunlight after storm clouds. She moved forward hesitantly, and Lyra met her halfway, pulling her sister into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry, Mira whispered against her shoulder. I believed them when they said you'd volunteered out of nobility. I didn't know they'd planned to send me instead. It's not your fault, Lyra murmured back. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. When they separated, Lord Whitmore looked like he'd swallowed something sour. This is highly irregular. This is my court, Adrian said quietly, but his voice carried enough menace to make everyone in the room take notice. And in my court, young women are not bartered like livestock. Lord Whitmore, you're welcome to attend the coronation as planned. After that, you'll return to your own lands. And our daughter? Your daughter will write to you regularly and visit when she chooses, but her home is here now, with family who values her for more than her marriage potential. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even really a suggestion. It was the absolute word of a king who had just drawn a line in stone. Lord Whitmore seemed to recognise this. His bow was stiff, angry, but he managed it. As you wish, Your Majesty. After they were escorted out, minus Mira, who remained at Lyra's side, Adrian turned to his queen-elect with pride shining in his amber eyes. "That," he said simply, "was magnificent." Was it? Lyra felt like her knees might give out now that the confrontation was over. "I just told off my own father in front of the entire court." "You protected someone who couldn't protect herself. You chose love over politics and convenience over family expectation." He cupped her face gently. "You acted like the queen you already are." 2 days later, under the light of a full moon, Lyra stood in the great cathedral, wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that sparkled with thousands of tiny diamonds. Adrian had insisted on blue instead of traditional white. "Queens shouldn't look like sacrifices," he'd said when the seamstresses protested. "They should look like the night sky, infinite, powerful, beautiful enough to steal breath." Now, standing before an audience of hundreds, Lyra felt every inch the queen he believed her to be. The ancient crown settled on her head with surprising lightness, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Do you, Lyra of House Whitmore, accept the sacred duty to rule justly, protect the innocent, and serve as queen to the people of this realm?" "I do," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. "And do you, Adrian of the royal house of Blackmire, accept this woman as your mate, your equal in all things, your partner in ruling this kingdom?" "I do," Adrian said, his eyes locked on hers with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. "Then, by the ancient laws of our people and the blessing of the moon herself, I pronounce you mated before gods and witnesses. Long live the king and queen!" The cathedral erupted in cheers as Adrian kissed her for the first time as his official queen. When they broke apart, both wearing matching grins, he pressed his forehead to hers in their familiar gesture. "How does it feel, Your Majesty?" he murmured against her lips. Lyra looked out over the crowd, at Mira beaming from the front row, at the courtiers who had come to accept and respect her, at the kingdom that was now as much hers to protect as his. "Like coming home," she whispered back, and for the first time in her life it was true. 3 months later, Lyra stood on the balcony overlooking the training grounds, watching Adrian spar with his guards in the early morning light. Gone was the desperate intensity that had driven him to war for 3 years. In its place was something she had never expected to see: peace. The kingdom had settled into a new rhythm under their joint rule. Trade routes that had been closed during the conflict were thriving again. Border disputes were resolved through negotiation rather than bloodshed. And slowly, steadily, the wounds left by years of war were beginning to heal. "Your Majesty!" Mira appeared at her elbow, no longer the frightened girl who had arrived with their father. 3 months of freedom and education had transformed her into a confident young woman with opinions of her own. "Lord Marcus is here for the morning briefings." "Thank you." Lyra squeezed her sister's hand. "Are you ready for your lesson with the music master?" "Actually, I was hoping to sit in on the council meeting instead." Mira's green eyes sparkled with intelligence that had been hidden under years of enforced meekness. "If you don't mind, that is." "Of course not." Lyra smiled, remembering her own hunger for knowledge when she'd first arrived. "Politics suits you." "I think it might." Mira glanced toward the training grounds where Adrian was just finishing his workout. "He's good for you, you know. I've never seen you look so happy." "Alive," Mira corrected softly. "You always tried to take care of everyone else. It's nice to see someone taking care of you for once." The simple observation made Lyra's chest warm. It was true. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. The morning council session was routine now in the best possible way. Reports of successful harvests, new trade agreements, a minor border dispute with the Eastern Territories that would be resolved through diplomatic talks rather than military force. "Lord Garrett sends his regards," Marcus reported, consulting his notes. "The Eastern Alliance is holding strong, and he's grateful for the leniency shown to his daughter during the tribute selection." "Elena." Lyra sometimes wondered what would have happened if the beautiful blonde had been chosen instead. The thought no longer carried the sting of inadequacy it once had. "Any word from the Northern Territories?" Adrian asked. "Alpha Thorne has honoured the terms of his defeat," Marcus replied diplomatically. "Lady Catherine has married Lord Blackwood of the Western Mountains. The alliance appears to be adequate for their needs." Lyra caught the careful phrasing and hid a smile. Catherine had indeed found her crown, just not the one she'd originally wanted. "What about the war reparations?" she asked. "The final payments were received last week," Marcus confirmed. "Your former kingdom has fulfilled their obligations early, actually. Lord Whitmore seems eager to maintain good relations." Of course he did. With his daughter as queen of the realm that had nearly conquered his own, cooperation was his only sensible option. After the council meeting, Lyra found herself in the garden where she and Adrian had shared their first kiss. It had become a tradition of sorts, stealing these quiet moments together away from the demands of ruling. "Penny for your thoughts," Adrian said, appearing behind her with the silent grace that had once terrified her and now felt like coming home. "Just thinking about how different everything is." She leaned back against his chest as his arms came around her waist. 3 months ago, I was prepared to die in that tribute line. And now? Now I'm planning a festival to celebrate the harvest, mediating a dispute between 2 merchant guilds, and trying to decide whether to fund a new library or expand the Healers' College first. She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "It's a good different." "The best different," he agreed, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Though I have to admit I'm partial to some changes more than others." "Oh, like what?" "Like the way you argued with Lord Peterson about grain distribution yesterday. Fierce, logical, completely unyielding, until he agreed to your terms." His eyes heated. "It was magnificent." "You like it when I'm argumentative?" "I like it when you're you. Confident, brilliant, protective of people who can't protect themselves." His hands slid up to cup her face. "I like watching you become the queen you were always meant to be." The kiss that followed was soft, familiar, full of the quiet certainty that had replaced the desperate urgency of their early courtship. When they broke apart, Lyra rested her head against his shoulder and breathed in the cedar and winter wind scent that meant safety. "Adrian?" "Hmm? Do you ever regret it, refusing the original tribute, starting all of this?" She felt him stiffen slightly. "Do you?" "Never." The answer came immediately, absolutely certain. "But I'm not the one who gave up a strategic alliance for a stable girl who didn't know which fork to use. Look at me." His voice carried just enough command to make her obey. When their eyes met, his were blazing with the same intensity that had claimed her that first day. "You want to know what I gave up? A political arrangement with a woman who saw people as assets to be managed. What I gained? A partner who sees people as lives to be protected." "Adrian?" "A mate who would sacrifice herself for strangers. A queen who stands up to her own father to protect her sister. A woman who makes me want to be better than I was." His thumb traced her lower lip, and she shivered at the familiar touch. "I would make the same choice again every single day for the rest of my life." The fierce conviction in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "I love you. And I love you more than duty, more than politics, more than any alliance could ever be worth." That evening they hosted a small dinner for the inner circle of their court. Nothing formal or political, just the people who had become family over these past months. Mira sat between Marcus and Lady Pemberton, debating the merits of different educational philosophies with the passion of someone who had never been allowed to have opinions before. "She's going to make an excellent advisor some day," Adrian murmured to Lyra as they watched her sister gesture enthusiastically while making some point about trade routes. "If she wants to be an advisor," Lyra corrected, "she gets to choose her own path now. Like her sister did. Her sister got incredibly lucky. Her sister was exactly where fate needed her to be." After their guests retired for the evening, Lyra and Adrian walked through the castle halls hand in hand. It was a nightly ritual now, checking on their people, ensuring all was well in their domain before retiring to their own chambers. "The Thornfield matter is resolved," Adrian reported as they passed the guards' quarters. "Young William will marry the baker's daughter next month, and his family has agreed to the match." "Love wins again," Lyra said with satisfaction. When they'd first taken the throne, arranged marriages had been the norm. Now, more and more couples were choosing their own partners. "I like this trend." "You would, considering how our own courtship began." "Our courtship began with you claiming me like a prize," she reminded him, but there was no heat in it. "The choice came later." "The choice came the moment you decided to trust me instead of running." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "That's what made all the difference, you know. Not the bond, not fate, not political necessity. Your choice to stay. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," he corrected with a smile that made her heart race even now. "What was the first?" "Stepping forward in that tribute line. If you hadn't volunteered, I never would have seen you, never would have known what I was missing." The thought was sobering. How easily they might have missed each other entirely. How different both their lives would have been if she'd let fear or propriety keep her silent that day. "No regrets?" she asked one final time. "Only one," Adrian said seriously. Her heart skipped. "What?" "That I waited 3 days to kiss you. Should have done it the moment I knew you were mine." The laugh that bubbled up from her chest was pure joy. "You're impossible." "I'm yours." "Yes," she agreed, rising up on her toes to claim the kiss he should have given her that first day. "You are." Later, lying in their shared bed with moonlight streaming through the tall windows, Lyra traced patterns on Adrian's chest and marvelled at the path that had brought them here. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, his fingers combing through her hair. "The girl who stood in that tribute line," she said honestly. "She was so afraid, so certain she was worthless. If someone had told her she'd end up here, she wouldn't have believed it." "No. She thought love was something that happened to other people. People who were beautiful enough, important enough, worthy enough." She pressed a kiss to his collarbone. "She couldn't have imagined feeling this safe, this cherished. And now? Now I know that worthiness isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose, something you fight for, something you become." She lifted her head to meet his eyes in the moonlight. "I chose to be worthy of this love, this life, this crown, and I'll keep choosing it every day." "Good," Adrian said simply, pulling her closer, "because I'll keep choosing you." Outside their window, the kingdom slept peacefully under the protection of a king and queen who ruled not through fear or force, but through the revolutionary idea that love could be stronger than war. And in the quiet of their chamber, surrounded by the warmth of their bond and the promise of tomorrow, Lyra finally understood the truth that had taken her a lifetime to learn. She had never been the spare daughter, the extra mouth to feed, the one they could afford to lose. She had been the one the kingdom was waiting for, the one who would choose love over conquest, healing over vengeance, hope over fear, the one who would prove that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from taking what you want, but from protecting what you love. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on these stories, and if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories of love conquering all.